Hello students, welcome back to my class. Today we are going to discuss the poem Casualty from Seamus Heaney's compiled work Fieldwork. Seamus Heaney, as you know, was one of the most prominent poets in the late 20th century, and he came from the Irish background, and through his poetry he wanted to explore various aspects of Irish life from his contemporary period, including his nostalgic childhood in the countryside, as well as the different aspects of common life, including the tribal life, in different poems. His interest in the landscape, the agrarian society, the culture, and the political fate of his land are all being represented in different manners. And the work in which this poem Casualty is published, it was published in 1979 in this field work, where we find there is beneath the title of this book, there are certain darker and more complex figures or images coming out to make the reader conscious about various incidents, various experiences of life that is buried or put under the carpet of so-called society or the global polity. So this poem is definitely an elegy. It is mourning the death of one of his friends, Louis O'Neill. And this is going back to the incident of 30 January 1972, the Bloody Sunday, when that Bogside massacre being committed by the British paratroopers on the innocent people of Ireland who were protesting against certain oppressive rules or practices. On this particular day, the Catholic community, they were protesting against the confinement at home, and this group, the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, they were being massacred without any warning by the 1st Battalion Parachute Regiment of the British military, and instantly 13 people died on the spot, and other casualties were there, which resulted in more deaths later on. But the poet is trying to bring this massacre to the fore of our consciousness by lamenting about the death of his friend O'Neill, who died after 3 days of this massacre by the bombing. And this poem, in this way, in a very indirect manner, brings out the political conflict, the political unrest that had afflicted Ireland for a long time, and in his own style, Heaney discusses about different aspects of this conflict and how the common man is being targeted, is being clustered in this conflict, and the suffering which is being suppressed in the name of political narrative is being punctured by Heaney's poetic narration. So let us look at this poem. The poem is also set in three parts. He has made it in three parts, and every part is having different stanzas. But here we find in almost every stanza, or at least in every part, there is a presentation of his lamentation about the friend's death, which is representing the present and the past association, the past memories of his friend. So in this way, this poem can be compared with Robert Browning's Love Among the Ruins, where there we find the presentation of the present and past simultaneously to bring into focus or to dramatize the intensity of feelings, the intensity of emotions and passions. And at the same time, we also find in this poem that there is alliteration and enjambment being used within rhyme and rhythm, where there are the use of half slant rhymes or couplets, and all these are being employed to make the poem more pointed towards the feeling of the poet, his emotions for the loss of his friend's life. So coming back to the poem, in the very first part we have three stanzas. He would bring by himself and raise a withered thumb towards the high self, calling another rum and black currant without having to raise his voice or order a quick stout by a lifting of the eyes and a discreet dumb show of pulling off the tops. So it is immediately describing about his friend's personality, and it is a dramatization of his friend's experience in the pub, where he sits for his drinks every evening. He would drink by himself and raise a withered thumb. He belongs to a workman class. He was a fisherman. So his thumb is withered towards the high self. He doesn't speak. He simply points his thumb towards the self to order his drink. Or from his very movement of the eyes, the attendants know what he wants. So he orders either the black currant or the quick stout. And by lifting up the eyes and a discreet dumb show. So the poet is telling this is a discreet dumb show, that there is no spoken words between his friend O'Neill and the attendant in the pub. And he is able to just continue his action without any spoken words. At closing time would go in waders and peaked cap into the soury dark, a dull-kept breadwinner, but a natural for work. So, after his drinking session, he raises himself up without much attention being drawn towards him, and in his waders in his gum boots and the peaked cap, he moves into the dark outer world, a dull kept breadwinner. He is being provided by the government the dole because either he was not earning enough or he was not in employment at that time, about which the poet is describing. But for a natural for work, but it doesn't mean that he is a lazy person or who doesn't like work. He is very natural for work. I loved his whole manner, sure footed but too sly. And the poet says that he loved all these aspects of his friend. And he loved his whole manners, sure footed. He was very sure, but too sly. But at the same time, he was also very sly. His deadpan sidling tact, and he doesn't have any expression on his face. It is deadpan and sidling tact, and he moves with the sidling movement, suggesting that he is also very adept in managing himself in any space, in any position. His fisherman's quick eye, and he also has the fisherman's eye, which is very quickly moving and spotting the prey. So his eyes are very quick and turn observant back, and he is also a great observant of everything around him. It doesn't mean that though he comes and drinks here, that he is absent minded about everything around him. Incomprehensible to him, my other life. Then the poet is talking about his relationship with his friend, that his friendship with O'Neill is there in the pub, and the friend doesn't know about the poet's poetic life, poetic career. Incomprehensible to him, my other life, sometimes on the high stool, too busy with his knife. And when we sat there, most of the time he was busy with himself. He was busy with his knife and the tobacco plug. He was trying to open the box of tobacco and not meeting my eye. Even most of the time he doesn't look at my eye. In the pause after a slug, he mentioned poetry. And sometimes after a long pause or a long silence or a long break from his work with the tobacco box or the drink, he sometimes mentions about poetry. We would be on our own and always politic. But what we discuss there, we always discuss about our present life there. The life that is there before us. And we were very politic. Always politic and shy of condensation. And we never pretended to be superior. So the poet is telling that he never feels that he is superior to his friend who is an ordinary fisherman and who is at the dole of the government. Not the fisherman ever has taken pride in being a very experienced fisherman. I would manage by some trick to switch the top to eels. And the poet also, what he does, he very cleverly or very efficiently switches the talk from poetry, because he knows that his friend will feel uncomfortable. His friend may not be able to talk much about poetry. So he, to make his friend very comfortable, switches the topic from poetry to the fishing. Talk to the eels, the fish, or load up the horse and cart, or talk about the horse, the cart. That means the mundane experiences of life, or the provisionals, or we talk about the iris forces, military forces, the provisionals, who were known as the provisionals. But my tentative art is turned back watches too. But the poet is telling that my friend Louis O'Neill, in spite of sitting there and not looking around, is as a fisherman. He has the experience, he has the intuition about what is going around. So he knows what happens at his back. He was blown to bits out drinking in a curfew. But here what happens? The poet until now was talking about the past, his experience of friendship with O'Neill. But now he is coming to the present when O'Neill is no more. O'Neill has died. He was blown to bits out drinking in a curfew. That in a curfew, he came out for his drink because he can't remain without drinking. Others obeyed. The curfew was obeyed by others. 3 nights after they saw death, the curfew was imposed continuously, and it was the 3rd night. For the 3 nights, others obeyed it. But he came out. Why the curfew was imposed? The 13 men in Derry, Paras 13, the wall said, Bauxite Nil, that Wednesday, everyone held his breath and trembled. Because the poet is reminding us about that incident, the Bloody Sunday, the Bauxite massacre that happened on 30 January 1972, when Paras means that paratroopers, the 1st Battalion Parachute Regiment of British Army, who killed 13 people on the spot, as the wall said, because these people were shot and their blood was splashed against the wall where they were protesting. And the bauxite, here bauxite means this Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, who are mostly the Catholics, nil. So it is just like the score line of the rugby team, as if there was the competition, the game between the paratroopers and the protesters. The protesters side nil, they couldn't kill anyone because they were protesting peacefully. They never wanted to kill. But the paratroopers killed 13 men immediately. That Wednesday, everyone held his breath and trembled, and everyone in this part of Ireland, Londonderry, the spot, everyone in this locality, they held their breath and trembled. The terror was created by this massacre. In the second part, again, the poet is bringing out the situation of the present and contrasting it with the past. It was a day of cold, raw silence, wind blown, surplice uncertain, rained on, flowers laden, coffin after coffin seemed to float from the door of the packed cathedral. So the poet is describing about the funeral after the massacre, when 13 people were massacred on the spot in Londonderry. So it was a day of cold, raw silence. It was a cold winter, and it was raw silence. Everywhere there is silence. Why? Because of the massacre, everyone was stoned, wind blown, surplice and certain. These are the clothes that the priests they were putting on, and their clothes, the loose clothes, were blown by the wind. Rained on. There was rain, flower laden, and the coffins were flower laden, coffin after coffin. So the 13 coffins were taken in a line, seemed to float from the door of the packed cathedral. The coffins were coming out of the cathedral. They were being taken towards the burial ground. Like blossoms on slow water, the common funeral unrolled its swaddling band. And people were putting flowers on the coffins as if it is the water on which the flowers were being strewn. And the band was there, but it was swaddling. It was very low, confined band, expressing the mourning, expressing the grief, lapping, tightening till we were braced and bound. And the band was continuing in this silence. There are only two sounds. One is the wind blowing the surplice and the sartan, and the funeral band that was being conducted, and these sounds and the whole silence, it was lapping and tightening everyone. Everyone was feeling as if they were gripped. They are being gripped with the sorrow, the terror, and all these unexpected change of the fate on the part of this land. Till we were braced and bound like brothers in a ring, and all were finding as if they were being kept within a ring. They were being confined to such a situation. The situation is being imposed upon them, and they were being confined as if they were the brothers in the ring. They were the brothers who have to suffer together, but he would not be held. But again, the poet is going back to the past, that on the day of his death, he was not to be held. At home by his own crowd, his own family couldn't check him. He didn't listen to them that he should not venture out in this curfew. Whatever threats were phoned, whatever black flags waved, he didn't care for the black flags outside. He didn't care for the threats coming from the British Army. I see him as he turned in that bombed, offending place. And the poet is now finding his friend's dead body. Where? In that bombed, offending place. The poet is using the phrase bombed, offending place. The place has been offended by the bomb by which his friend Louis O'Neill was killed. In his still knowable face, his cornered out face stare, blinding in the flash. And the poet saw in the face of his dead friend as if it is having the knowledge of everything in this world. As a fisherman, because the fisherman is considered to be the symbol of the wise man, because he ventures into the unknown part of the sea, and he fishes, and he brings out the fish out of nowhere. He knows everything about the sea, he knows everything about this world. So he is one of the wise men in this everyday life, in this mundane world. So that knowable face was visible on his dead body. His cornered out face stared. He was staring and blinding in the flash. And when the bomb exploded, his eyes were blinded by the flash. That was also visible on his dead face. The poet witnessed. He had gone miles away, for he drank like a fish. And the poet is coming back to the situation in that time. He had gone miles away, for he drank like a fish. And he could not be controlled by his own people. Why? Because he was a regular drinker. He drank like a fish, nightly, naturally. swimming towards the lure of warm lit up places. And he was also the lover of the bar or the places of drinking. He was a lover of the pub, where he found the warm lit up places, the blurred mace and murmur drifting among glasses. The very scenario of a pub or a bar being described by Heaney, which was alluring to his friend O'Neill, who couldn't control himself and he ventured in the curfew. How culpable was he that last night when he broke out tribe's complicity? Now you are supposed to be an educated man. So the poet is remembering that how just before that, once when they were sitting together and he was talking about, now you are supposed to be an educated man. I hear him say, puzzle me the right answer to that one. He asked the poet that you must be an educated man, and he wanted to know from the poet that the right answer to that one. That means they were discussing about the poetry and he wanted to know about something, but at the same time he was also talking about his experiences in the world of nature, in the world of the fishing, and he wanted to know the response from the poet about that. He expected that the poet, as an educated man, knows also about all the mysteries, all the tricks of fishing. In the third part, the poet is becoming more grave and more sad. He's telling, I missed his funeral, but the poet was unable to attend his funeral. Those quiet walkers and sideways talkers strolling out of his lane. So, we do not know why the poet missed that funeral. Is it because of the curfew or he was not there? But the poet is able to imagine, to visualize how the funeral of his friend would have been. Those quiet workers, the people working in his funeral, they were working quietly, and sideways talkers, and they were also conversing with each other by the side of the road, swirling out of his lane to the respectable podding of the hears, and there were not much sound, and the sound of the conversation between the people in low voice by the side of the road, and the hears carrying the dead body, moving and creating that purring sound. They move in equal pace with the habitual slow consolation. So the hears the dead body in its coffin, within the coffin, moving, and the people moving. They are moving with the same pace, with the habitual slow consolation, as if they were consoling each other. They were consoling their grief through the unification of their pace. Of a dawdling engine, the line lifted, hand over fist, cold sunshine on the water, and suddenly out of this vision of the funeral of his friend, the poet is again having another vision, which was in the past. What was that? Dawdling engine. That the engine of the boat, the fishing boat, which was moving very slowly. The poet is making a comparison between the slow moving hairs and the slow moving boat in the sea. The line lifted, the fishing lines lifted, hand over fist, cold sunshine on the water, There was cold sunshine on the water. The land bent under fog, and there was fog on the land. That morning I was taken in his boat. When his friend invited him in his fishing boat to go for fishing, he wanted to share his world of action, his experience with the poet who shares his poetry with him in the pub. So, the poet vividly remembers about the invitation of his friend to accompany him to the sea for fishing. The screw purling turning, indolent fathoms white. And the screw in the fishing rod purling, turning indolent fathoms white. I tasted freedom with him. So that was a wonderful world of freedom, where you move in the open sea, where you fish, where you can release your fishing line for the fish to catch. And the poet is making it a contrast with the socio-political life in Ireland, where people are confined to their homes by the order of the British Army. I tasted freedom with him to get out early, haul steadily off the bottom, dispraise the catch. So he's describing vividly how they went, how they were catching the fish from the bottom of the sea, and the moment there was a catch, they were dispraising, they were criticizing the fish, they are finding out the fault of the fish, how the fish fell for their tricks, and smile as you find a rhythm. So why the poet is talking about the fish and dispraising the fish? Because he is being reminded about the arrogant behavior of the British troopers. So they must have also felt like that after killing the 13 people on this bloody Sunday. And smile as you find a rhythm, working you slow mile by mile into your proper haunt, somewhere well out beyond. So they were hunting the fish mile after mile, going on finding out the fish somewhere and well out and beyond. They were searching and finding the fish everywhere. So that is being contrasted with the soldiers coming and killing the protesters who were gathered in Londonderry on that fateful day. And also on the next Wednesday, when his friend Louis O'Neill was killed, who was going all alone during the curfew, like a fish avoiding the hook, but he was hooked. As they had hooked the fish, his friend was also killed by the bombardment. And the final stanza is a very short one, only of 3 lines. Dawn sniffing, revenant, plodder through midnight rain, question me again. So the poet is finding dawn sniffing, the morning is sniffing, revenant ploddered through midnight rain. There was midnight rain, and the dawn is coming after the death of his friend. Question me again. But the dawn is questioning the poet that why his friend had to be killed. Why the people of Ireland had to be killed by the soldiers of the British. Because what they wanted, what they demanded, they were simply demanding their own national identity, their freedom, their own experience of life in their own land. But for that, they have to lose their life. So the ending is very poignant, and the poet is bringing the word question with a capital Q, and that is the question that the people of Ireland are asking to the people of Britain and the people of the whole world, that what is their fault? Why they are being killed? So in this way, we can find that this is a wonderful poem, a great elegy, which is also having its similarity with W.B. Yeats' Easter 1916, and this poem is also commemorating or celebrating the sacrifice of the common man for his spirit of nationalism, for his spirit of individual freedom. And from this poem, we can expect questions like how Seamus Heaney blends the Irish nationalism and its struggle with the lamentation for his friend's death. Or the question can be about Heaney's presentation of his sense of belongingness to Ireland, and at the same time his universal humanism being presented in this poem. I hope you people will do justice to these two questions and will be able to answer it properly.